There are places in the world where time behaves as expected, where yesterday becomes memory, today becomes experience, and tomorrow waits patiently for its turn. But there are also places where time folds strangely, where the past slips away like water through open fingers. In one such village, tucked quietly between hills and silence, the people woke each morning with minds as blank as untouched pages. They forgot everything, every argument, every joy, every promise, every mistake, all except one man. His name was Marty, and he alone remembered yesterday. This is the story of the burden he carried, the choices he faced, and the quiet truth he learned about memory, mercy, and the weight of knowing what others could not. Marty rose before dawn, as he always did. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, letting the quiet settle around him. The village was still asleep, wrapped in the deep, dreamless slumber that came before the forgetting. He listened to the faint breaths drifting through the thin walls of the homes nearby. In these moments, before the sun touched the rooftops, the world felt almost whole. He stood, stretched his shoulders, and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth. He watched the horizon brighten, a slow wash of pale gold. He had learned to measure his life by this light, the moment when memory dissolved for everyone but him, as the first rays crept across the village. He felt the shift. It was subtle, like a sigh passing through the air. Doors creaked open. Footsteps shuffled. Confused murmurs rose like a familiar chorus. Marty's mother was always the first to emerge. She stepped outside, blinking at the morning light, her expression soft and puzzled. "Marty," she said, as if tasting the name for the first time. "Is it morning already?" "Yes, mother," he replied, offering the same gentle smile he had given her every day for years. "It is." She nodded, satisfied, unaware that she had asked the same question countless times before. Marty watched her for a moment, then turned toward the village square. People were beginning to gather, rubbing their temples, stretching stiff limbs, greeting one another with the tentative politeness of strangers meeting for the first time. They did not know they had lived entire lives together. They did not know they had laughed, argued, wept, or celebrated side by side. They did not know the weight of the words they had spoken the day before, but Marty did. He remembered Tomas's anger, Lyra's tears, his mother's quiet sorrow. He remembered every promise made and broken, every wound inflicted and forgotten. He remembered everything, and as he watched the villagers greet the morning with innocent confusion, he felt the familiar heaviness settle in his chest. Another day had begun, another yesterday belonged only to him. Marty made his way toward the square, where the villagers were gathering in their usual morning confusion. They greeted one another with polite nods, unaware that they had done the same countless times before. Their faces held no trace of yesterday's joys or wounds. They were blank slates. Every sunrise, Tomas, the potter, approached Marty with a stiff gait, rubbing his wrists as if they were made of brittle clay. "Marty," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Do you know why my hands ache? I woke with this pain, but I cannot recall what I did." Marty paused. He remembered clearly. Tomas had spent the previous afternoon smashing his own pots in a fit of anger after accusing his brother of stealing clay. He had shouted until his voice cracked, then wept alone behind his workshop, ashamed of his outburst. But Tomas remembered none of it. "You worked too hard yesterday," Marty said, keeping his tone steady. Tomas frowned. "Yesterday?" He looked down at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "What was yesterday?" Marty offered a small, patient nod. "Just rest your hands today." Tomas accepted the answer with a grateful sigh, unaware that Marty had soothed this same confusion many times before. As Tomas walked away, Marty felt the familiar heaviness settle deeper in his chest. He was the only witness to the village's hidden life. The only one who saw the patterns, the mistakes. The quiet cruelties that vanished with the dawn. He carried the memories of arguments that never resolved, apologies that never landed, promises that evaporated before they could be kept. He carried them alone. A soft voice broke through his thoughts, "Marty." He turned to see Lyra standing a few steps away. She was in her late 20s, with a calm presence that made her seem older than the others. Her eyes, however, held a searching quality that unsettled him. While the rest of the village accepted their forgetfulness with gentle confusion, Lyra questioned everything. She approached him slowly, as if afraid she might disturb something fragile. "Do you ever feel," she began, choosing her words carefully, "that something is missing when we wake? As if we lived something important, but it slips away before we can grasp it?" Marty kept his expression neutral. "Most people feel that way in the mornings. But this is different," Lyra said. "It's not just confusion. It's sorrow. A kind I can't explain." Marty felt a quiet ache in his chest. He remembered the day before, how Lyra had stood beside him near the well, her voice trembling as she confessed her fear that her father no longer loved her. She had cried softly, embarrassed by her own vulnerability. Marty had comforted her, promising that her father cared more than she realized. Now she remembered none of it. "You're not sad," Marty said gently. "Just unsettled from waking." Lyra studied him, her gaze sharp. "You always say that. Because it's true. Is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marty looked away. He did not know how to answer without unraveling everything. Lyra stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Marty. Do you ever feel like something is wrong with this place?" His heart tightened. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said. "But every morning feels like the first. And yet, not the first. As if I lived something before, but it slips away when I try to remember." Marty forced his voice to remain steady. "You're imagining things." Lyra's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in quiet suspicion. "I don't think I am." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something he could not give her. Then she sighed, the tension in her shoulders softening. "Perhaps I'm just tired." Marty nodded, though he knew fatigue had nothing to do with it. As Lyra walked away, he felt the weight of her unspoken questions pressing against him. She was getting too close to the truth, closer than anyone had ever come, and Marty, stoic as he tried to be, felt a flicker of fear, not for himself, but for what the truth might do to her. Marty avoided Lyra for the rest of the morning, though he felt her eyes on him more than once. She had always been perceptive, too perceptive for a village that forgot itself every sunrise. Her questions lingered in his mind long after she walked away, stirring a quiet unease he tried to ignore. By late afternoon, the village had settled into its usual rhythm. People worked with the calm focus of those who believed they were learning their tasks for the first time. Marty repaired a fence near the edge of the square, his movements steady and practiced. He preferred work that kept his hands busy. It made the weight of memory easier to bear. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ground, he heard footsteps behind him. "Marty," Lyra said softly. He turned. She stood a few paces away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. There was a tension in her posture, a quiet determination that made Marty straighten. "Walk with me?" she asked. He hesitated. The hours before dusk were the only time he allowed himself to rest from the burden of remembering. But something in her expression, an urgency he couldn't name, made him nod. They walked along the narrow path behind the village, where the air cooled quickly and the silence felt deeper. Lyra kept her gaze forward, as if gathering courage. Finally, she spoke. "Marty. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." His jaw tightened. "What is it?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. Do you remember things I don't? The question struck him like a blow, though he had expected it. Her eyes held no accusation, only fear, and a fragile hope that made his chest ache. Why would you ask that? He said quietly. Because every morning, you look at people as if you already know them, she said. You warn Tomas about hurting his hands. You remind my father to rest his voice. You speak to me as if we've had conversations I can't recall. Marty looked away, Lyra stepped closer. And there's something else. When I wake, I feel something. A heaviness. As if I lost something important. As if I cried, though I don't know why. Her voice trembled. Did I cry, Marty? He closed his eyes. He remembered her tears vividly, the way she had tried to hide them, the way her voice had cracked when she spoke of her father. Yes, he said softly. You did. Lyra inhaled sharply. And you comforted me? Yes. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if steadying herself. Why don't I remember? Because the village forgets, Marty said. Every morning. And you don't? No, Lyra stared at him, her expression shifting from confusion to something like awe, and then fear. Why you? She whispered, I don't know. She looked down, her voice barely audible. Marty. I don't want to forget anymore. He felt his breath catch. I want to know who I was yesterday, she said. I want to know what I felt, what I said, what I feared. I don't want to wake up empty every morning. Her eyes lifted to his, shining with a desperate sincerity. So promise me something. Marty's voice was low. What? Tomorrow. When I forget. Remind me. He stared at her, stunned. No one had ever asked him for such a thing. No one had ever wanted the truth. Lyra, he said, I don't think you understand what you're asking. I do, she insisted. I want to remember. Even if it hurts. Marty felt something inside him shift, an ache, a longing, a fear he could not name. He had carried the village's yesterdays alone for so long that the thought of sharing even a piece of that burden felt dangerous, but Lyra's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. Please, she whispered. Marty exhaled slowly. I promise. Relief washed over her face, softening her features. She reached out and touched his arm, a small gesture, but one that lingered long after she pulled her hand away. Thank you, she said. They walked back to the village in silence. But Marty's thoughts churned with a quiet dread. He had made a promise he did not know how to keep, and as the last light faded from the sky, he wondered whether he had just changed the course of both their lives. Marty barely slept. He lay awake long after the village had gone quiet, staring at the ceiling as Lyra's voice echoed in his mind, tomorrow. When I forget. Remind me. He had agreed. He had spoken the promise aloud. And now the weight of it pressed against him like a stone he could not set down. When the first pale light crept across the rooftops, Marty rose. He stepped outside and waited, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders squared in the way of a man preparing for something he did not want to face. The forgetting swept through the village like a silent wind. Doors opened. Confused murmurs drifted into the morning air. Lyra stepped outside her home, blinking at the light. She looked rested, peaceful, untouched by the sorrow she had carried the night before. Marty? She said, surprised. You're here early. He felt his throat tighten. I needed to speak with you. She tilted her head, puzzled. About what? You asked me something yesterday, he said. Something important. Her brow furrowed. Yesterday? What happened yesterday? Marty hesitated. He had rehearsed the words, but now they felt heavy, dangerous. You asked me if I remembered things you don't. Lyra blinked. Why would I ask that? Because you felt something was wrong, Marty said. You felt sorrow. You cried. Her expression shifted, first confusion, then discomfort. I cried. Why would I cry? You were afraid your father didn't love you, Marty said quietly. You told me you felt forgotten. Lost. Lyra stepped back, her breath catching. Marty. Why are you saying these things? Because they're true. She shook her head. No. I don't feel any of that. You did, Marty said. Yesterday. Lyra's voice trembled. I don't remember any of this. I know. Then how can it be true? She whispered. Marty felt something inside him twist. He had expected confusion, maybe even fear, but not this. Not the way she looked at him now, as if he were a stranger speaking in riddles. Lyra, he said softly, you asked me to remind you. Her eyes widened. I did. Yes. She stared at him, searching his face for something familiar, something that might anchor her to the truth he carried. But there was nothing for her to grasp. Her mind was a blank page, and his words were ink she did not recognize. Marty, she said, her voice breaking, I don't understand. I don't feel any of the things you're describing. I don't remember asking you anything. I don't remember crying. I don't remember. She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest as if steadying herself. You're frightening me, she whispered. Marty stepped forward instinctively, but she flinched. Lyra, please, she said, backing away. Stop. He froze. She looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes, eyes that held no trace of the girl who had stood beside him at dusk, begging him to help her remember. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. I don't know why you're saying these things. Marty felt the promise crumble between them. He had told her the truth, and she had rejected it, not because she didn't believe him, but because she couldn't bear it. Lyra turned and walked away, her steps quick and unsteady. Marty watched her go, the morning light catching in her hair, making her look almost weightless. He stood alone in the square long after she disappeared from sight. The truth had not set her free, it had frightened her, and for the first time, Marty wondered whether remembering was a gift at all, or a wound he had no right to share. Marty spent the rest of the morning in a quiet haze, moving through the village with the steady, deliberate steps of a man trying not to disturb the ground beneath him. Lyra's fear lingered in his mind like a bruise, tender, unavoidable. He had kept his promise. He had told her the truth. And the truth had frightened her more than the forgetting ever had. By midday, he found himself walking toward the elder's house without fully deciding to go. His feet simply carried him there, guided by a need he could no longer ignore. Soren, the village elder, sat outside his doorway, sharpening a small knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. He was a quiet man, his face lined with the kind of weariness that came from years of watching people forget the things he could not remember himself. He looked up as Marty approached. You're troubled, Soren said. It was not a question. Marty stopped a few steps away. I need to speak with you. Soren nodded once, setting the knife aside. Then speak. Marty hesitated. He had never spoken openly about his burden, not to anyone. But the words pressed against him now, demanding release. Why does the village forget? He asked. Soren's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, barely noticeable, but enough for Marty to sense the tension beneath the surface. That is the way of things, Soren said. That is not an answer. Soren studied him for a long moment. Sit. Marty lowered himself onto the wooden step beside the elder. The air felt heavier here, as if the truth itself lingered in the shadows. Soren folded his hands. Long ago, before you were born, the village suffered greatly. People remembered too much. Old wounds festered. Grudges grew like weeds. Anger spread faster than forgiveness. The past became a chain no one could break. Marty listened, his jaw tight. One morning, Soren continued, the village woke without memory. No one knew why. No one knew how. But the forgetting brought peace. Arguments dissolved. Hatred vanished. People treated one another with gentleness, because they believed every day was a beginning. Marty's voice was low. Peace built on ignorance. Peace built on mercy, Soren corrected. Marty looked away. Mercy for whom? For everyone, Soren said. Including you. Marty shook his head. Not for me. I remember everything. Soren's eyes softened. Yes. You do. Why? Marty asked. Why am I the only one? Soren sighed, the sound heavy with years. Some say the forgetting chose you. Others say it failed to take hold. Perhaps you were meant to carry what others could not. Or perhaps you were simply born different. Marty clenched his hands. I don't want this. No one wants the burden they are given, Soren said quietly. But you carry it nonetheless. Marty felt anger rise in him, not loud, not wild, but deep and steady, like a river carving stone. I tried to tell someone the truth today. She asked me to. She begged me. And when I did, she was terrified. Soren nodded slowly. The truth is a heavy thing for those who are not used to holding it. She wanted to remember, Marty said. She thought she did. Wanting is not the same as bearing, Soren replied. Marty looked at him sharply. So what am I supposed to do? Lie to them? Pretend nothing happened? Carry their mistakes forever? Soren's voice was calm. You must decide whether to speak the truth. Or protect those who cannot bear it. Marty stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of the words, and the weight behind them. Soren placed a hand on Marty's shoulder, his grip steady. You are the keeper of yesterday, Marty. Not its judge. Not its messenger. Its guardian. Marty felt the word settle into him like stones sinking into deep water. Guardian. The title felt both too large and too small. Too heavy and too fitting. Soren withdrew his hand. Whatever choice you make it with compassion. That is all any of us can do. Marty rose slowly, his thoughts tangled, his heart heavy. As he walked away, he realized something quietly devastating. He had been searching for answers, but what he found was responsibility, and it was heavier than any truth he had ever carried. Marty avoided Lyra for the rest of the day, though her presence lingered in his thoughts like a shadow that refused to fall behind him. He repaired fences, carried water, helped Tomas lift a heavy crate, tasks that usually quieted his mind. But nothing silenced the memory of Lyra's frightened eyes. By dusk, the village had settled into its evening calm. People spoke in soft tones, their voices carrying the gentleness of those who believed they were meeting the night for the first time. Marty sat alone near the well, elbows resting on his knees, watching the last light fade. He heard footsteps behind him. Marty. He closed his eyes briefly before turning. Lyra stood a few steps away. Her hands clasped tightly, her expression troubled. May I sit? She asked. He nodded. She lowered herself beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet stretched, thin and fragile. I had a dream, Lyra said finally. Marty's jaw tightened. A dream? Yes. She looked down at her hands. I saw myself crying. And you were there. You held my hand. You said something, but I couldn't hear it. Marty felt his breath catch. Lyra lifted her gaze. Why would I dream something like that? He hesitated. Because it happened. Her eyes widened. What? You cried, Marty said softly. You told me you feared your father didn't love you. I comforted you. You asked me to remind you. Lyra stared at him, trembling. Why don't I remember? Because the village forgets, he said. Every morning. She shook her head. No. That can't be. That makes no sense. It's the truth. Lyra pressed a hand to her chest. Marty. Why would I ask you something like that? Why would I cry in front of you? I don't feel any of those things now. Because you forgot. She stood abruptly, her breath unsteady. Stop. Please. Marty rose as well. Lyra, no, she said, backing away. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to feel this. You asked me to remind you, Marty said quietly. I made a promise. I don't remember asking you anything. She cried. I don't remember being sad. I don't remember any of it. How can it be real if I don't feel it now? Marty felt something inside him fracture. Because feelings change. Memory doesn't. Lyra shook her head violently. No. No, I don't want this. I don't want to wake with sorrow I can't explain. I don't want to hear about tears I don't remember shedding. Her voice broke. I don't want to be someone I can't remember being. Marty stepped forward, but she held up a trembling hand. Please, she whispered. Don't tell me anything else. He froze. Lyra's eyes glistened with fear, not of him, but of the truth he carried. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. I can't bear it. She turned and walked away, her steps quick and uneven. Marty watched her disappear into the dimming light, the promise he had made dissolving with her retreating figure. He stood alone, the night settling around him like a shroud. He had kept his vow, and in doing so, he had broken something far more fragile, not her trust, not her peace, but the illusion that truth could save her. Marty lowered himself back onto the well's stone edge, his hands trembling despite his stoic composure. He had believed honesty was a kindness. He had believed she wanted to share the burden. But Lyra had shown him the truth. Some people do not fear forgetting, they fear remembering, and as the first stars appeared overhead, Marty understood that his vow had not been broken by choice, it had been broken by reality. He could not give Lyra the truth without taking her peace, and he could not take her peace without betraying the very compassion that defined him. He bowed his head, the weight of yesterday pressing harder than ever. Tomorrow, she would wake with no memory of this pain, but he would carry it, he always did. Marty woke the next morning with a heaviness that felt older than his own bones. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the familiar quiet of the village before the forgetting swept through. He had grown used to this silence, this brief moment when the world still held its shape. But today, it felt different. Thinner. As if something inside him had begun to fray. When the sun rose, the forgetting came as it always did, soft, invisible, absolute. Marty stepped outside and watched the village stir awake. People blinked at the morning light, stretching like children who had slept too deeply. They greeted one another with gentle confusion, unaware of the lives they had lived the day before. Lyra stepped out of her home moments later. She looked rested, peaceful, untouched by the fear that had shaken her the previous night. She saw Marty and offered a polite smile, the kind one gives a familiar stranger. Good morning, she said. Marty nodded. Good morning. She walked past him without hesitation, without the slightest flicker of recognition. The memory of her tears, her trembling voice, her plea for truth, gone. Erased. As if it had never existed, Marty watched her go, his chest tightening with a quiet ache he refused to show. He had known this would happen. He had known she would forget. But knowing did not soften the blow. He turned away and walked toward the edge of the village. Needing distance from the morning's innocence, he followed the narrow path that led to the old well, the place where he often went to think. The air was cool, the silence steady. He sat on the stone rim and let his thoughts settle. He had tried to give Lyra the truth. He had tried to honor her request. But the truth had frightened her more than the forgetting ever had. And now he carried not only her sorrow, but the knowledge that he had caused her pain she could not understand. He closed his eyes. You must decide whether to speak the truth, or protect those who cannot bear it. Soren's words echoed through him. He had believed that truth was a kind of mercy. But now he saw the flaw in that belief. Truth was only merciful when the one receiving it was strong enough to hold it. Lyra was not, most of the villagers were not, and perhaps, he realized with a quiet, painful clarity, he was not either. He opened his eyes and stared at the still water below. His reflection wavered, distorted by the faint ripples. He looked older than he felt. Tired. Worn by years of carrying what others could not, he whispered to the empty air, I cannot keep doing this. The words surprised him. They felt like a confession he had been holding for years. He had spent his life remembering for others, carrying their mistakes, their regrets, their fears. He had believed it was his duty, his burden, his purpose, but now, for the first time, he questioned that purpose. What if remembering was not a gift? What if it was a chain? What if the village was not cursed by forgetting, but protected by it? The thought unsettled him. It felt like betrayal. But it also felt like truth. He stood slowly, his hands resting on the rough stone of the well. He had reached a turning point. He could no longer pretend that remembering was noble. He could no longer believe that truth was always the answer. He could no longer carry the weight of yesterday without questioning whether it was meant to be carried at all. He looked toward the village, where people moved with the lightness of those unburdened by the past, and for the first time in his life, Marty felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Envy, not of their innocence, but of their freedom. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. He did not know what choice he would make, but he knew this, something had to change, and whatever came next would shape not only his life, but the lives of everyone who woke each morning with empty minds and open hearts. Marty returned to the village with a heaviness that made each step feel deliberate, as if the ground itself resisted him. The morning had unfolded as it always did, people greeting one another with gentle confusion, unaware of the lives they had lived the day before. But something inside Marty had shifted. The turning point he had reached at the well lingered in him like a quiet echo. He walked toward the square, where Lyra stood speaking with her father. She laughed at something he said, her face bright and unburdened. The sight struck Marty with a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. She looked whole, peaceful, free. She had forgotten everything that had hurt her, everything he had told her, everything she had asked him to share, and she was happier for it. Marty turned away before she could see him watching. He made his way toward the workshop where Tomas shaped clay with the calm focus of a man who believed he was learning the craft for the first time. Tomas glanced up as Marty approached. Morning, Tomas said, smiling. Feels like a good day to start fresh, doesn't it? Marty nodded. It does. Tomas returned to his work, humming softly. His hands moved with ease, unaware of the anger that had driven him to smash his own pots just yesterday. Unaware of the tears he had shed afterward. Unaware of the regret Marty had carried for him, Marty stepped back outside, letting the door close behind him. He stood in the quiet street, the weight of the village's innocence pressing against him from all sides. He had spent years believing that remembering was his duty. That truth was a kind of light he was meant to carry. But now he saw the truth for what it was. A burden, a sharp, heavy thing that cut deeper the longer he held it. He walked toward the well again, needing the stillness of that place. The path was familiar, worn by his footsteps over countless mornings. When he reached the well, he rested his hands on the cool stone rim and stared into the water below. His reflection wavered, distorted by the faint ripples. He looked older than he should have, eyes shadowed, shoulders tense, jaw set in a line carved by years of silent endurance. He whispered, "What am I supposed to do?" The water offered no answer. He closed his eyes and let the silence settle around him. He thought of Lyra's fear, Tomas's confusion, his mother's gentle forgetfulness. He thought of Soren's words, "You must decide whether to speak the truth or protect those who cannot bear it." He had tried to speak the truth, it had broken something fragile. He had tried to honor his promise, it had caused pain. He had tried to share the burden, it had frightened the one person who had asked for it. Marty opened his eyes. He knew what he had to do, not because it was easy, not because it was right, but because it was merciful. He would stop reminding them. He would stop offering truths they could not hold. He would carry yesterday alone, not as a punishment, not as a duty, but as an act of compassion. He straightened, feeling the decision settle into him like a stone finding its place in a riverbed. The weight did not lessen, but it became steadier, something he could bear without breaking. He turned back toward the village, his steps slow but certain. He would guide them gently, he would protect them quietly, he would remember so they did not have to, and though the burden was heavy, he would carry it with the same stoic compassion that had shaped his life, because some truths were not meant to be shared. Some memories were not meant to be returned, and some people, like Marty, were meant to hold the past so others could live unburdened in the present. Marty returned to the village with his decision settled quietly inside him, like a stone that had finally found its resting place. The morning unfolded as it always did, people greeting one another with gentle confusion, unaware of the lives they had lived the day before. But Marty moved through them differently now. Not as a man searching for answers, but as someone who had accepted the shape of his burden. He passed Tomas, who waved cheerfully, unaware of the anger that had consumed him only yesterday. Marty nodded back, offering a calm smile. There was no need to remind Tomas of the broken pots, the harsh words, the regret. Those memories belonged to Marty now, and he carried them without resentment. He helped an elderly woman gather her scattered laundry, though she did not remember dropping it. He guided a young boy away from a loose stone he had tripped over the day before. He reminded a man to drink water, knowing the man had fainted from heat the previous afternoon. Small things. Quiet things. Acts of care that required no explanation. He had become the village's unseen guardian, not by choice, but by necessity. As he walked, he felt the weight of yesterday settle more comfortably on his shoulders. It was still heavy, but no longer sharp. No longer something he fought against. He carried it the way one carries an old scar, painful at times, but familiar. Near midday, he saw Lyra standing by the well, speaking with her father. She laughed at something he said, her face bright and unburdened. The sight struck Marty with a quiet ache, but not the sharp pain of the day before. It was softer now. Acceptable. She saw him and offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon, Marty." "Good afternoon," he replied. Her father greeted him warmly. "Marty, you look thoughtful today." Marty smiled faintly. "Just thinking about the work ahead." "Well, you've always been a steady one," the man said. "Reliable." Marty inclined his head. "I try." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression curious but not troubled. You always seem to know what people need, she said. Even when they don't. Marty felt a quiet warmth at her words. I pay attention, he said simply. She smiled, unaware of the depth behind his answer. As they walked away, Marty remained by the well, watching the water ripple gently. He felt no urge to tell Lyra the truth. No urge to remind her of the tears she had shed, the fears she had confessed, the promise she had begged him to make. She was at peace, and that was enough. He turned and walked through the village, offering small kindnesses where they were needed. A steady hand. A quiet word. A gentle reminder that asked for nothing in return. He had become the keeper of yesterday, not its judge, not its messenger, its guardian, and though the burden was heavy, he carried it with the same stoic compassion that had shaped his life, because some people needed forgetting to survive, and someone like Marty, needed to remember so they could. Marty woke before dawn, as he always did. The quiet felt deeper today, as if the world itself were holding its breath. He sat on the edge of his bed, letting the familiar stillness settle around him. The village slept, unaware of the lives they had lived, the words they had spoken, the wounds they had inflicted or healed. He rose and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth. He watched the horizon brighten, the first pale light stretching across the rooftops. And then, as always, the forgetting swept through the village, soft, invisible, complete. Doors opened. Footsteps shuffled. Confused murmurs drifted into the morning air. Marty's mother emerged first. Blinking at the light, "Marty," she said, her voice gentle. "Is it morning already?" "Yes, mother," he replied. "It is." She smiled, unaware she had asked the same question every day of his life. Tomas waved from across the path, cheerful and unburdened. "Morning, Marty." "Morning," Marty answered. Lyra stepped outside her home moments later. She looked peaceful, her expression soft and open. She saw Marty and offered a warm, polite smile. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he replied. She walked past him, unaware of the tears she had once shed in his presence, unaware of the promise she had begged him to make, unaware of the truth he had tried to give her. She carried no memory of sorrow. No trace of fear. She was free. Marty watched her go, his chest tightening with a quiet ache that no longer surprised him. He had accepted this ache. It was part of the burden he carried, part of the role he had chosen. He walked toward the square, where villagers gathered with the innocence of those who believed every day was a beginning. He moved among them with steady steps, offering small kindnesses where they were needed. A gentle reminder. A guiding hand. A quiet word. He did not speak of yesterday, he did not return the memories they had lost, he simply carried them. As the sun climbed higher, Marty paused near the well and looked out over the village. People laughed, worked, and spoke with the lightness of those unburdened by the past. They lived in a world without regret, without bitterness, without the weight of old wounds, and they lived that way because he remembered for them. He felt the weight of yesterday settle on his shoulders, not crushing, not unbearable, but steady. Familiar. A burden he had learned to carry with compassion rather than resentment. He understood now that remembering was not a punishment, it was a responsibility, a quiet, unseen act of care. He turned toward the village, ready to face another day of guiding those who would forget again tomorrow. His steps were slow but certain, his expression calm. He was the keeper of yesterday, and he would remain so. In a village where every sunrise erased the past, Marty learned a truth that lingered long after the forgetting: not all burdens are meant to be shared, and not all truths are meant to be spoken. Some are meant to be carried quietly, held with compassion rather than pride. He discovered that remembering is not always a gift, and forgetting is not always a curse. Sometimes, mercy takes the shape of silence. Sometimes, the greatest kindness is to hold the weight others cannot bear. And sometimes, the strongest hearts are the ones that carry yesterday so others may live freely in today.